Welcome to the channel. My name is Matthias. Today we're going to talk about Jordan B. Peterson, who he's a fascinating character. He's a real piece of work. And what I want to share with you guys very briefly are my personal views of Mr. Peterson, how they evolved over time. Now, when he first came out, I found him to be fascinating. He had some really interesting points. I did not see eye to eye with many of those points of view, but I thought it was fantastic that he was opening up this debate. And talking about that debate, I had seen on YouTube that interview that he had on the BBC where he just crushes the interviewer to the point that I felt bad for the interviewer for how ill-prepared she was for this guy. And what I saw was a guy sharp as a tack that had certain level of academic respect. So I just wanted to double check because I didn't remember if Jordan B. Peterson was a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So I did a quick Google search, and man, this guy has grown as a media personality. And he's a psychologist. He specializes in clinical psychology. He's not a psychiatrist. Because at least in his field, I noticed that he tried to be scientifically rigorous. He always would cite the studies where he would pull his information from. I was very interested and purchased his book, 12 Rules for Life. It's a fascinating read because his main focus, at least in that book, were young men or men that were struggling with their lives, trying to get their act together. Most of the book revolves around common sense ideas to get your shit together. There's not much to it. He does dive into some interesting ideas and concepts. Especially, I loved how he defines the concept of sacrifice. And we're going to get into that in another video. And we're going to do a deep dive into his book, even though I sold it off many years ago. He also tells personal stories of his to illustrate certain points that I thought that was pretty cool. Also, it seems possible maybe that he's read comic books. He actually makes a reference to a character from the X-Men that was a really, really deep cut. And me being a comic book nerd, I picked up on that and other things that are sprinkled through the whole book. I also think he contracted Ethan Van Sciver, who is a comic book artist who worked with Marvel and DC, and now I think he's doing an independent thing. He's a hardcore right-winger. I think he illustrated the covers to each one of the chapters of his book in the printed edition. And the book, I would even give it a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty quick read. It's very constructive in its nature. He was finding a young male audience that felt that they were being villainized in much of the political discourse. Still up until this day, masculinity is a problem. Patriarchy is a problem. Exaggerating a little bit, you had like the extreme left making young guys feel bad that they were guys, being told that they were the problem. You have many middle-aged and younger men struggling to keep their jobs, falling behind the technological curve, losing their jobs to technology in many cases. You have the left in general abandoning the workers, shifting their focus from workers' rights to gender rights, gender dynamics, again, focusing on the patriarchy, while many of these guys are losing their jobs. And what would happen with a lot of these guys, who many might see themselves on the left? They shifted their political points of view to a very, very hard right. And I'm simplifying this a lot. We're going to dive really deep on this subject. But this happens all across the world, and we have this rise of this new generation of the new right. And I will describe as just colorful, interesting characters like Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, here in Argentina, Javier Milei. All these right-wing politicians found fertile ground because the left forgot about the workers. I'm not saying that they have to ignore the other issues, which, at least for me, seem to be very easy wins. But the working class, the workers, should be the base of your constituency. And these right-wing politicians get so much political capital from this culture war. It's so stupid. Where we have the left just feeding into their narrative. It's just incredible. They add fuel to the fire. And here we have Jordan Peterson just really capitalizing on all this. He has this obsession with left-wing progressives. And I think he has a hard time even defining them. And that's one of my big issues with Mr. Peterson. I totally acknowledge he can have his own political points of view, but He thinks that since he's a psychologist, he has informed political points of view, that his views are substantive, and they're totally not. When you go through the bibliography of his book, because he does touch on these issues in 12 Rules, he only cites 2 or 3 books, and that's it. Mr. Peterson seems to think that political thinking ended way back in the 1960s and has never evolved. You can't call yourself an expert on a subject when you read 2 books that were published way back in the day. I know you're a psychologist. I know that you have to read academic books and magazines all the time, that you have to keep up to speed with all the changes within your field, just like I do in my field. And the thing that made me tune out with Mr. Peterson was when he had this debate with Slavoj Žižek, who's like the diametric opposite of Mr. Peterson, also a very colorful dude. And I'm meaning he's pretty eccentric. But the thing is, he goes to this debate and he openly says, "I'm not familiar with your work and I've never read one of your books." And I was like, what a lack of respect. And I thought to myself, that was a total lack of respect. To, if I'm going to a debate with someone, even though I don't share his points of view, I'm going to study up on the guy. I don't want him to make me look like an idiot. Another thing that I noticed with Mr. Peterson, especially when he had this interview with Sam Harris, he talks a lot about religion and the Bible and about God. He puts a lot of emphasis on how religion does make your life maybe easier or helps you deal with things in a more constructive way. And I can totally understand that. But it's not clear if he personally believes in God. And even Sam Harris realizes it, but he never puts him on the spot. Then Mr. Peterson popped up a couple of times on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he always says the same things. Like, he has like this script that he goes through. But I noticed this total shift to the right where he started to pander more and more to people on the right. He found an audience. Like, I could totally understand his message finding resonance there, even though some key subjects I find them to be universal. But again, people on the right like those messages and the left doesn't. But when he fell in line with the people at The Wire and Ben Shapiro, he went hard to the right. He really, really started to pander to the right. It was shameful. Any type of credibility, academic credibility that this guy had, he just threw it out the window. But who cares? He has 7 million subscribers on YouTube now. He talks full time about religion now, that I'm not going to get into if he believes or not. That's his thing. But in politics, he doesn't know jack shit.